Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to be making a Brazil nut apple spice bread. And that's the reason I'm wearing the same clothes I wore in the Brazil nut milk video. I'll be using the pulp that I had left over after straining out the Brazil nut milk in the bread. So that's what's making it Brazil nut bread, along with some home-canned, homegrown ground cherry apple sauce. So let's get to it and I'll show you how I make it. Well, I say that like I've made this particular bread before, but I haven't. However, my quick sweet bread type recipes are all virtually the same. I have a pumpkin bread recipe that's pretty much the same. The only difference is that instead of 2 cups of pumpkin in that one, in this one I'm going to be using 2 cups of the ground cherry applesauce. But I'll also be making a few alterations because I'm using the pulp, which is a little bit moist from that's left over from the Brazil nut milk. And so, and then I do basically the same thing, banana bread, zucchini bread, it just depends. The only real difference is what fruit or vegetable I'm adding to it. So anyway, what I want to start with, let's get these dried ingredients mixed together first. I'm always playing around with flour. Typically I use my home milled flour mixed with some white flour, but I've often experimented with gluten-free flours in the same recipe and it works pretty good. But today I'm not doing gluten-free, but you can alter your recipe to suit you as is needed. So I'm using 1 cup of whole milk flour. And then I'm going to be using 1 cup of organic white flour, unbleached. And that one there is the King Arthur flour, organic flour, and I'll link to it below if you're interested. However, I just also bought, even though I have a whole bunch of organic white flour in storage, I did just buy some at Costco, which is actually the same brand, the Central Milling organic flour I used to use when I was able to get it through Glory Bee, and I really like that flour. If you're looking for a good organic unbleached flour, that's a good one, and at least it's available at our Costco. And so to that I'm going to add a teaspoon. This one is actually the Himalayan salt. I found I did still have some left over. A teaspoon of the Himalayan salt, but you can use the Redmond Real Salt, also an excellent brand. They're high in minerals. That's why I always recommend those ones and trying to stay away from the typical, at least here in the States, the white salt that we have, the pure white salt. It's usually junk. It has nothing good in it for you. And then about a teaspoon of baking powder. I went a little heavy. That's closer to a teaspoon and a half. And a teaspoon of baking soda. And this one I want to make sure I don't go heavy on, because you know how baking soda is. It can have a strong flavor. Okay. And then since I'm going to go ahead and make this a spice bread, I'll add my cinnamon and my cloves to this as well. So I like to use a whole tablespoon of cinnamon because we like lots of cinnamon, and I use the Ceylon cinnamon, so that's safe. If you're using cassia cinnamon, it's okay, it's got good properties too. You just want to limit how much you use of that, because too much is definitely an excess. You don't have to worry so much with Ceylon cinnamon getting an excess. And I will link to the Ceylon cinnamon I use below. And then cloves, obviously you don't want to go too heavy on, so we'll put in probably about, it looks like about 1/4 of a teaspoon. And then blend that in well. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and work on in a separate bowl. Usually what I do, I don't usually do this in a separate bowl. I usually make a well in my dry ingredients and then put my liquid ingredients in there. But for today, just for at least demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and mix it separately. So however you want to do it is up to you. You know, if you're skilled enough that you feel like you can mix your eggs and oil and all that together well enough in the flour and then mix it into the flour, you can do it that way if you choose, and that way you're not dirtying up as many dishes. However, this method here may be easier for you. So what I've got here is 1 cup of organic melted coconut oil, and this is the unrefined, so it has the nice coconut flavor in it, and I like to get it now at Costco. They have the best price that I found anywhere for a good organic unrefined coconut oil. And then let's see, we need 3 eggs. So you'll want to mix this quickly. And this is why I do the dry ingredients first, because I'm going to grab that same bread whisk and whisk these together. You can use a big fork. That's often what I like to use. And then if you want, you can add a little bit of, this is totally optional, but a little bit of whatever homemade extract you got, whatever flavor you want. Over here I've got vanilla, pineapple, cherry, and raspberry right over there. But in this one, I'm going to use the orange extract. So I'm going to put about a teaspoon or so of that in there. And one thing I forgot to add to the dry ingredients was about a tablespoon or so of some orange peel, dehydrated orange peel. And if you're interested in how I do this, I'll go ahead and link to my video down below and up here in the iCard. Okay, and so now this is where we get to our nut pulp. So I'm going to add that right here. You can actually add it to either the dry or the wet ingredients because it's somewhere in between. Because I'm using this, I didn't put 3 cups of flour in here because I'm using the pulp as a partial flour replacement in this recipe. So again, you can mix the pulp depending on how dry it is into either your wet or your dry ingredients. So now let's mix those orange peels in there. Oops, I almost forgot the apple. Now this applesauce, this ground cherry applesauce is actually from 2016. Typically what you're going to do is 2 cups. I'm going to go 1 3/4 cups because of the moisture in this and what's already in the nut pulp mixture, which I know I forgot to measure it out, but I'm pretty sure there's at least a good cup there. So I'm not even going to bother to measure this because I know this is what I like about quick breads is measurements when it comes to such things do not have to be exact. But I know there's about 2 cups of applesauce in here. So we'll just put most of it in and then we'll mix that together. This bowl is about too small for this. Okay, and then one more thing I'm going to add, and this is again is totally optional, is if you happen to have a fermentation starter on hand, just put in about up to a tablespoon of that in there. That's just going to add a little bit more health benefits and give it, more likely help it to become even fluffier because it's going to help that bread to kind of ferment and rise nicely for you. It's just kind of like equivalent to maybe putting some buttermilk in your pancakes or something like that. Just makes it fluffier and just helps make a real good bread. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and add the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients. And the other thing to consider, since I'm using coconut oil in this, it's now that it's cooled off, it is kind of solidifying a little bit. And so that might make it harder to blend. So just consider that, and also harder to pour. So you may prefer to use maybe avocado oil in this rather than the coconut oil or whatever other type of oil. All right, I just realized I totally forgot to add the sugars to the dry ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in now. Typically in a bread like this, when you're doing a 2-loaf bread, quick bread, sweet bread, you're going to put up to 2 cups of sugar. So I'm going to modify this a little bit, and I'm going to use 3/4 cups of my organic cane sugar. Let's see, that's about a 1/2 cup there. So let's do another 1/4 cup. And then I'm going to use a 3/4 cups of the coconut sugar. It's going to make it a lot less sweet, but I've already got the applesauce in there, which adds some sweetness as well. So it's not as necessary to have so much sugar. I like to use equal amounts of the coconut sugar, organic coconut sugar, and the cane sugar when I'm making my quick breads. But I did taste this dough before adding the sugar, which is where I realized, oh, I forgot the sugar. But it tasted really good just as it was. So I'm actually glad I tasted it first. I was actually going to put in about 1 3/4 cups of sugar, where here I only have 1 1/2 cups of sugar because I think the apples give it plenty of sweetness as it is. All right, now I'm going to be using the cast iron bread pans, and I'll link to these below, but I'm sure you can find them in your local store if you have a store that's kind of a multi-purpose, especially, you know, even some hardware stores will carry cast iron pans. But I'll go ahead and link to these. When I bought them, I got them as a 2-pan set. I'm not sure if they're still sold like that, but I got a good deal on them that way. So basically what you want to do is take your bread, or pour or dump it in there, your dough, into each pan so that you have about equal amounts in each one. And what I've done is added a little bit of coconut oil to each of the pans and let them heat up. I like to preheat my cast iron whenever I'm putting anything in there. I just think that helps it to brown better on the bottom and sides. And on top of that, then you can easily melt your butter or your coconut oil or whatever it is that you're putting in there. Though I'm guessing I probably added it in text by now. Make sure that you preheat your oven to 325 degrees. All right, so I'm gonna get these in the oven, 325 degrees. I'm gonna bake them for about 45 minutes and check on them then. And that's a good time to check on them, and you may need to go up to a full hour depending on your oven. Now that I've got the bread in the oven and it's baking, now is a good time for me to make the icing. This is totally optional, but also another good reason why you may wanna cut back on your sugar in your bread if you want to add a little icing, because it not only does it add a little bit of flavor, it just makes the bread look a little bit prettier. So when I'm doing a spice type bread like I have here, like when I do pumpkin spice or apple spice, I like to make an orange icing. Now I just put a recipe video out on making raspberry rolls, and there I made a raspberry icing using heavy whipping cream. This one I'm only going to be using water. So when I'm doing sweetbreads like this, I prefer to not use the whipping cream. I like to have a thinner, more lighter type icing to go on top, because it's more something I just want to drizzle on there just to add for looks as well as the flavor. So let's get to it on this icing. So what I have here is my homemade powdered sugar, and it's all organic, very easy to do, and I have a video on this that I'll link to up there, iCards and in the description box. Don't forget to hit show more. And I'm going to start with about, let's say a half cup of my powdered sugar. And then to this, I'm going to put just a very small pinch of salt, very small pinch. That's just going to help bring out the flavor. And I'm going to add about a tablespoon of the dehydrated orange peels to this. And I'm going to put in, again, I'm going to be using the orange extract as well in this. So this is the homemade extract that I also have video on how I do this, and I'll give you the link to this as well if you're interested. And I love the fact that you can make your own extracts out of just about anything and just make all these wonderful flavors that you can use in doing stuff like this. Now I recommend you take the water you're going to add and put it in something that's easy to pour. So I'm going to use this measuring cup here, add just a little bit of my rainwater in here. Not that this isn't easy to pour, it's just a lot easier to control how fast you're pouring it when you're doing it this way. Because you want to add just a little bit of water at a time and stir that in there. Just a little at a time, because remember, you're working with powdered sugar. And I think I'm going to go a little more runny than that, because those orange peels are going to soak up some of that moisture as this sits. So that's actually pretty good. It is going to dry. So the nice thing about this is you don't have to worry so much, because I'm not using milk in it. I don't have to worry so much about it possibly spoiling, though I've never had that happen with my icing. But if you decide you need a little bit more, or it's too runny, simply add a little bit more of your powdered sugar and some more of your orange peel if you're going to do it this way. Now, some other options you can use for an icing, which I almost thought about doing on this one, but since I decided to add the orange to the bread, you can take your freeze-dried cherries or strawberries or whatever and powder them up like I did in the raspberry roll recipe, and then use this in your bread and in your icing. Now I have a picture right here of some strawberry banana bread, and that's what I did there. I just made a regular banana bread, but then what I did was I took some freeze-dried strawberries, powdered them up, made an icing, a thicker icing, and then poured it over the top, so that added a nice pretty color, as well as gave the banana bread that added strawberry flavor to it, and it was really quite wonderful. So many things you can do with your freeze-dried fruits and some of your dehydrated stuff. The thing I like about freeze-dried is, depending on certain types of fruits, it tends to powder up a lot better. Dehydrated orange peels powder up pretty good, but freeze-dried cherries, strawberries, and stuff are going to powder up much better than your dehydrated ones. So that's why I like those and always keep them on hand. So now that I got all this in there, the liquid added to the powdered sugar, it's actually down to only a quarter cup of the icing, which might still be plenty, but I think I'm going to go ahead and increase this by another 50%. And then when the bread is all done, I'll show you how I apply this. Okay, so I'm back. The bread is done. Now you can see it didn't rise really high, but that's what's going to happen when you use like a nut pulp and whole grain flours, or even gluten-free flours. It's harder to get a good rise on your sweetbreads when you do that. Using 100% white flour is going to give you a much better rise. However, I'm sure this is still going to be delicious. It smells wonderful. And so what I do when I like to get my bread out of the cast iron pans as soon as possible, but when you're working with quick breads, you have to be careful because they are very fragile when they're hot. So you might want to let them rest for like 5 to 10 minutes, but still good to deal with them while they're warm. And I like to take a table knife and work it around the pan this way and make sure that the bread is very loose, and then even get a smaller spatula, stainless spatula like this, and then kind of get in there and sort of work it out carefully so that it's not going to tear. So my breads came out, even though I took them out of the pans pretty hot, they turned out pretty nice that way. And so now I've got my icing here, and so I'm simply going to take that. You can either pour it right over there, but I sort of like to use my fork and have a little bit better, or even a spoon, but for some reason I just find I have even better control when I use a fork, because I'm just drizzling a little bit at a time, and I like to let it run down the sides. It just adds a nice look to it that way. And just don't put too much, because this is very runny. Unless you make it thicker, you can make it thicker. But if you make it runny like I've got here, then you want to work with just smaller bits at a time. When it's thicker, it's not going to run as quickly. But this way, as it's cooling, you can come back and add a little bit more as you go. Maybe even fill up those cracks a little bit when it gets that crack right there in the middle. Just let it go ahead and ooze down in there. It just makes it that much yummier. So again, this is actually more for looks than anything, but it does add a nice extra sweetness and flavor. And again, another good reason why, if you're going to do this, then cut back on the amount of sugar you're going to use in your bread. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this set for a bit, let it kind of cool and dry some more, and then I'm going to come back. This is why I like doing some of it while the bread is hot, because it's going to kind of melt in and ooze around things. Now I'm going to let it cool and then take this last little bit and maybe add it to the top, or see any spots that I think might need a little bit more. Okay, well, I'm done with the bread other than coming back and adding a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture or two right here so you can see what it looks like all done and when it's sliced, because I want to wait for it to totally cool before I do all that. And then you can see the finished product, and it sure smells amazing. And so that is one way you can make a sweet bread. Now remember, you can use, instead of applesauce, you can use pumpkin for a pumpkin spice bread. You can make this a banana bread, and like I said, with the strawberry icing or whatever kind you want. And then another idea I recently had that I haven't tried yet, but once I do, I will try to get a video out on it so you can see how I do it. But you can use my same recipe I have here and simply do it as a banana bread, and then take some freeze-dried pineapple, powder it up, and make a nice icing out of it, and then use your pineapple extract if you have one like I have here. This is also using the Mother Earth Products freeze-dried pineapple, and I'm going to use this in the bread. So banana coconut pineapple bread, and then also I'll add a little bit of this to the icing like I did with the orange icing here. So I think that'll be pretty tasty. A nice tropical type bread. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new, and encourages you to be creative using your different freeze-dried fruits and whatever you've got in food storage to make just a yummy bread however you want it to be. Okay, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.